welcome in to the Gaming Discourse. I am Tyler Frater alongside Richard De La Cruz.
Hello.
And Chief Engineer Lieutenant Commander Connor Frater, who is not here with us today. Joining us today to talk about crunch, workplace culture, and other stuff around the industry. Former BioWare developer for a little more than 20 years. Executive producer for Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and Dragon Age Inquisition. Mark Darrah. Hi, Mark.
Hey, nice to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Before we get started, we have a lot of ground to cover. Please tell people you're on Twitter, you're on YouTube. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm Mark Darrah on Twitter because if I change my name, I'll lose my blue check mark. And on YouTube, I'm Old Game Dev Advice. If you're looking for discussions about some of the intricacies of game development, it's worth a look.
Okay, and then Triage Games, is that it's a project you started? I think it was September 2021. Was that when I saw the Twitter page pop up?
Yeah, so I have. There's not much there. In fact, you're the first person to actually ask me about it. I have a Twitter account, Triage Games, and we have a web page and an email address, which is how you got in contact with me. But we don't have anything else to talk about at this point. No.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, September is probably right.
Awesome, great. So let's start with why you got into game development in the first place. What inspired you? Did you get into it because you wanted to make games? Did you get into it because you just really liked computers? How did things get rolling there?
So when I have a computer science degree. When I was in my third year of my computer science degree, I did an internship for 16 months. I worked at a company that made database software, and super exciting. And doing that made me realize that actually what I was looking for from a career after school was something where I worked on a product that actually was used by people. In Canada, in particular, in the late 90s, a very common place for people to get jobs with a computer science degree was in the big telecommunication companies. And in those cases, what you probably ended up doing was write a piece of software that was installed on a piece of hardware that was in a box in a field somewhere, routing phone signals across the country. And I realized that that wasn't something that I was really very interested in. I actually had a job offer from IBM, but at the same time, someone I'd worked with at my internship had gotten a job at this brand new video game company in Edmonton, BioWare, and so that seemed perfect. Something where I could work on a product that was going to be used by people and video games, so that's even better. So that's how I ended up at BioWare. I was already in Edmonton, so it made the transition pretty easy.
Oh, great. Okay. So your YouTube channel, you've covered a lot of stuff, and when I decided to reach out and see if we could talk, when I thought of things to ask you, I went to your YouTube channel and I tried to see if I could find a video to see if you had already answered some of the questions, and you've done a ton of stuff on there, and it is all extremely helpful. And one of your videos that really took off was your video about crunch, which I think was extremely helpful and informative for people to get sort of like a technical understanding of it and how it actually happens. And so in the video, you talk about sort of reasons that crunch happens, and you give even specific examples. I think one example that was really illuminating to me was, I think it was expectations. So if you tell somebody you want a bike, and in their mind they think motorcycle, then you have sort of you have an uneven communication there, and they're spending time making a motorcycle instead of a bicycle. And I thought that was sort of a really interesting way of explaining things. But I wanted to ask if there was, it seemed like in the video it was all sort of downstream. It was like leaders to the people that they're leading. When it comes to mitigating crunch, is there ways to mitigate it horizontally, like leader to leader, something that you may not be like somebody's leader, but you sort of work beside them as a team? Is there something there?
I do think so. Honestly, I think that after all of that, after making that video, after sort of chewing on it, I think the single most common underlying cause of crunch is a lack of completion urgency, which is a lack of a willingness of an individual or a team to bring things to completion. Because it feels like there's more time, or it feels like people aren't finishing their stuff, so why should you finish your stuff? So I actually think that one way to mitigate crunch, this obviously isn't a magic silver bullet, but one way to mitigate crunch for people around you is if you are pushing things to completion, if you are bringing things further along, then that can serve as like a seed crystal for other things to get pulled further along, get further into completion. So if you have a large team and one of the sub-teams is bringing all their stuff to done, two things are going to happen. One, their velocity might look really bad because they're actually doing more work to bring things further along than other teams that are kind of just checking the checkboxes but not really finishing. But the other thing is that when you're reviewing, this content is going to stand out from the rest and has the potential at least to bring other things along. It's easier if everyone is doing it, because if you have every completion, then the natural pressure of the project is for me to bring things to that same level of completion. I don't want to put the half-done thing into the project that looks super polished, because I know that it's going to be the worst looking thing in the game. Whereas if it's kind of this inconsistent mess, it's a lot easier for that to occur. And then what ends up happening is that the incomplete stuff kind of has a tendency to drag down the completion of the project as a whole. But if you can maintain a certain rigor or be a bastion of completion on the project, it can help to some degree. I do think that completion urgency is the single greatest source, but as well, peer-to-peer communication is critically important. Because as I said in the video, and as you mentioned, is, you know, if I'm going to be doing a UI and the different team is the one making the UI widgets, and I just need a list of text, but my specification is vague, they might over design that and spend tons of extra time on that, resulting in that coming late and triggering crunch from downstream. Just considering the downstream impacts of the work that you're doing is really important, because a common source of crunch from devs, as opposed to from leadership, is people who are so passionate about their particular thing that they push it further, they put in more effort than is necessary to bring it to a higher level of quality. And it sounds on the surface like, that's great, you kind of want that. And if everyone was an isolated island, it probably would be a net good. But the consequence of that often is I spend longer on the finger animations for the character animations, which means I deliver those animations late, which means that the combat designer who's been waiting for those now has 3 or 4 less days to work on their stuff. So you've caused crunch for people down you. So those passion projects almost always have downstream consequences. So as an individual dev, keeping that in mind is probably the easiest thing that you can do to help mitigate crunch on your team.
Completion urgency, I think, was fascinating because when I first watched the video, I had to watch it a little bit to sort of get the definitions down. But then I thought to myself that completion urgency exists in other places of life than just game development. And I even thought of like myself when it's on a much smaller scale. But like when I write a review of something, like I could, you know, do a 10-minute review and I could work on it for a year and it'd be the greatest 10-minute review ever made, you know, but like I have to at some point just finish it and understand that I've like completed a goal. And I never conceptualized that before. So I thought that was a fascinating piece of understanding how game development works, but then also just a fascinating piece of understanding how working on something works. What about at even higher levels? How is there any way that on like a corporate level, you think that even higher level executives could do things to help reduce crunch or better that culture that maybe somebody that's like an executive producer or leader of a design team can't do?
Yeah, I think there probably is. It's, it's at least at EA, the executives, the corporate level executives, the C-suite people, don't really set culture at the individual studios, but they do control the purse strings. And because they control the purse strings, they ultimately kind of do control everything. So I do think that public companies, or at least all the public companies that I've worked for, are obsessed with short-term results. Your game is supposed to come out in this quarter, and it should come out in this quarter. And if it doesn't come out in this quarter, it better come out in this fiscal year. And moving across, so BioWare has a history of sliding games. But the reality is that EA, you can slide from quarter to quarter, but sliding outside of a fiscal year, it's happened, but it's really hard. And there are usually really terrible consequences involved in doing so. And I think what has happened to some degree is the corporate culture will eventually infect and take over the cultures of the studios, I believe. So if you look at BioWare in 2008 and 9 and 10, it was BioWare's culture with culture kind of on top, dictating things at a very macro level. But then if you fast forward 10 more years, that EA culture, that sort of fiscal culture has sort of bled into BioWare's culture to some degree. So I think actually to some degree, I think what EA really wants is they want studios like BioWare to be like, it's all about the art, man. We don't care when it ships. We don't care how many copies it's going to sell. We don't care. And they provide the rigor to force that. But instead, I think what naturally happens is you realize that, but this is a corporation. We need to care about profitability and release dates and all of these things. But by doing that, that resistance has gone away. And while before in like Dragon Age Origins and Mass Effect 1 and times, the balance was over here, it starts to shift more towards a corporate focused way. So I think that the thing that probably the C-suites need to do is figure out how to give back the studios back that resistance, that willingness to say, the game's not ready. It's not going to hit the fiscal year, and they say they do, but they really don't because it's the culture is just eroded away over time. And I mean, it will be interesting to watch Respawn because newest acquisition, and right now, just culturally, like that resistance just there, just like BioWare 2008, 2009. But let's see what's happening with Respawn in 5 or 6 years. I hope they can keep that up, but I don't even think this is not like evil EA infecting on purpose. I just think naturally being within a big organization, it just happened through osmosis over time.
Sure. It's interesting because I think Vince Zampella, is he still the lead of Respawn?
Respawn, yes.
Yeah. And I think he even has said before that Respawn sort of has a different relationship with Electronic Arts. So it's interesting that you bring that up. But I don't remember if it was him. It's a vague memory, so don't quote me. But okay, that's fascinating because one of the stories that's going on right now, and I think it was partially related to what may have been your latest video, the of milkshakes and redheads, is stuff that's going on in Activision-Blizzard. Most recently in one of their quarterly reports, they talked about one of their issues is that they have like too few games that they rely on. And when people talk about Blizzard, they often talk about sort of the history. It was, besides the culture stuff, but like back in the day, you had StarCraft, and then eventually Activision was brought into the picture, and then since it's been like Activision has sort of that corporate culture has sort of taken over, but it's tough to define it because if you're outside of it, you can't explain how it's happening.
I don't even know that I know how it's happening either, but actually Blizzard's an excellent example. I mean, ignoring the,
sure.
Blizzard's other problems.
All the stuff. Yeah.
Sure.
But I think that when Blizzard got acquired by Activision in the first place, it was seen as, all the reports coming out of there was Blizzard is a separate company that gets to do whatever they want, and their culture is separate. And then over time, it got infected by the Activision corporate culture. And I don't think there was an intention there by Activision. I don't believe it was, but it happened anyway.
Okay, so I want to pivot back to Crunch for a little bit, because you started to answer some questions that I wanted to ask in a little bit, and that was really great. But over the past like 6 or 7 years, it seems like coverage, video game coverage from different press outlets about Crunch has definitely increased. Before you left BioWare, was there any sort of, did that coverage, that increased coverage, change? Did you see a cultural change? Did people start to take notice of things more often? Just because at least from my perspective, it felt like media outlets started to cover it more. People that were playing the game started to notice it more. But I don't really know if it affected things actually on the inside at all.
So what I would say is that the culture around Crunch has been changing dramatically at BioWare for the last 7 or 8 years. But I would actually think that it's maybe not the I don't believe that it's the reporting that's causing the change in culture at the studios, and the change in reporting is caused by something. There's another cause for both of them, and I think it might be that we just have a development. People are getting more experienced, older, and we're getting, and I think that might be what it is. But I don't believe that we were trying to improve Crunch culture because Kotaku was talking about, or Jason Schreier wrote an article about what happened on Anthem. I don't believe that's the cause. I think that those are both symptoms of another cause, which is causing the change. And maybe it's older people in game development, but actually now that I say it out loud, maybe it's actually the opposite. Maybe it's the Gen Z. Maybe it's Gen Z coming into the workforce with very different expectations of what work looks like that are causing the change.
Yeah. Sure.
When you look back on your career, do you ever how do you think you handled Crunch? Do you have regrets? Do you think I could have handled this better, that better? How do you conceptualize that?
I definitely don't think I've handled Crunch both when I was doing it, but also when I caused it to occur on teams. I believe there were other answers. I don't necessarily know what those other answers were or are, but I believe that there are other answers. And that's why I think I've really focused on why I say keep coming back to completion urgency as being such a critical part. Because I think a lot of the other things that we think are causing Crunch, like, it just makes people faster. It doesn't make people faster.
Right.
It doesn't, and or it's just about passion. And sure, these are all either false causes. We trigger Crunch because we're getting behind, but what's happening when we trigger Crunch because we're getting behind isn't that we're going faster. We're probably actually going slower. It's that we stop spinning our wheels so much because we start wanting to finish. The crunch that's caused by passion projects, that's real, but it's not a major thing in terms of the volume of crunch. So for me, and I've been searching for this for a while, finding sources of completion urgency that aren't crunch, aren't an executive is coming to look at the game, aren't E3, has been a quest that I've been trying to solve for a while. I think BioWare may have abandoned it, but something I was working on in the sort of last couple of years at BioWare was Pile of Sand. And the idea of Pile of Sand is to focus the team on a single point, or at least as small of a point as you can, and then use that focus to kind of cause the game to come into being around that. And I know there are people at BioWare who hate Pile of Sand, but it definitely causes completion urgency. And so it, in a way that nothing short of Crunch or E3 has done very successfully. So if teams can find ways to have completion urgency in the middle of production, when the beginning is far in the past and the end is far in the future, then that's the way, period. That's the way to deal with crunch, is just be finishing things. Don't put off finishing things to later.
Okay. So moving away from crunch then, we referenced Activision-Blizzard's other cultural problems, and there has been a wave of reporting and different stuff on cultural issues from Ubisoft and Activision-Blizzard to smaller studios like Scavenger Studios, Fulbright, and smaller indie devs like that. Two halves here. What is your reaction like to these kinds of cultures? Activision-Blizzard was described as a frat boy culture, I think it was, in the lawsuit. And when these sort of things get reported, how does it affect the day-to-day work? You know, if I'm a developer at BioWare and I hear that some other AAA studio has some horrible culture, and it's likely that I maybe know someone who works there, or someone who's working with me once worked there, or something like that. How does that impact your day-to-day life, if at all?
I think it definitely does, because I think anytime one of these stories hits, there's always a moment of self-reflection to look and say, like, well, do we have that culture too? Have we just not had this moment where it's all come out in the public? And I think the answer often in a lot of studios is kinda, maybe not as bad as what we're hearing coming out of Blizzard or what you're hearing coming out of Ubisoft, but I mean, it's a young industry, and it's not a diverse industry, but including gender diversity. Mm-hmm. And that can result in problems. I mean, I like to think that, well, for sure, BioWare's culture today is way better than BioWare's culture was in 1997 when I started. Or you even see it you can even see it in the games. But I mean, it's not perfect, and there are people in more senior roles, or there have been people in more senior roles that are problematic. And as someone who worked to remove people who were problematic, it can be incredibly difficult to do, because usually there's no smoking gun. Usually it's reports or innuendo, and it's everyone kind of knows, but to actually have something actionable is really hard. And that sounds so terrible, because it is terrible, because it is really hard. I've burned massive amounts of political capital in some cases to get rid of people who were toxic, but were in very senior positions. I think when you see the good news is, this is what I think the great thing is that when this is coming out of Ubisoft, when this is coming out of Activision-Blizzard, it lowers the bar for other studios to improve their culture. Because what you're basically saying is, you better get a handle on this, or it's going to be you. And so where before it's like, well, this guy, you know, he never crossed the line. And now it's like, well, we've moved the line. Because it's just so I think what's happened is the level of what's being treated as acceptable has become way lower, way less is acceptable. And that's, I think, a net good. Is this how you would want improvement to happen? No, this is not. You don't want it to work this way. You want it to be a constant, steady state towards better and better culture. And I think, you know, BioWare has been trying to do that. But I think when other studios don't do that, and then a giant light gets shone on them, it actually helps with other studios to say, you know, we also have to take a look at ourselves and think about what's going on, and look at our processes and our culture and our hiring practices and all of these things.
So how do you I know this is an extremely challenging question because I don't think there is a clear answer, and you already sort of told us some of the problems, like taking action on something when you don't really have anything you can take action on. But in terms of setting the culture, what are things, how can somebody that was in a position like yours go about setting that culture where you say these kinds of things aren't okay? Are there techniques? Are there rules? Are there, I don't know, is there seminars? I mean, what effective ways?
I mean, all of those things exist. And don't get me wrong, I do think that BioWare, I do think EA has done a better job of this than some of the other publishers and studios have done. So all of those things I do think help. But I do think that, honestly, the single thing that you can do that helps the most is to get someone of the group that is underrepresented at a high enough position to have a voice be heard. So a lot of companies have very diverse hiring processes that brings in junior people, very from you know, underrepresented races, from underrepresented genders, but then the actual culture of the studio squeezes all of that out. And by the time you get up to leadership, by the time you get up to the levels that I was at, it's all white dudes. And so yes, processes, yes, seminars, sure, all of that, do all of that. But you need to get a person of color, you need to get a woman at your executive level to be able to say, like, this thing that this person is saying is probably true because that's what I experienced. And, you know, believe people for sure, but it's hard because you don't have the same experiences. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to be proactive. You can act, you can have processes, but without actual representation at the table, all you can do is act mechanically, I guess, would be what I would say is if you have humans there, they can act in a humane way. If you don't, if all you have is cis, het, white dudes, then all you can do is act almost mechanically. You can just go down the checklist and go like, well, this is what we need to do in this scenario. And it's better than nothing, but I don't think it's the way that you actually address this.
Okay. So speaking of representation, just recently contracted workers up in Edmonton at a Keyword Studios announced that they were attempting to unionize. I think I'm not that fluent on labor law in the United States, let alone Canada. So I mean, I
believe they're attempting to unionize. Yeah, I think they're going to hold a vote, and if I can't remember what the number is, some percentage of them vote to unionize, then they will be unionized, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 40%. You made a video about unionization. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm paraphrasing, but you said something similar at the end too. You're not convinced unions in general are a great solution, but they may be the only reasonable solution. I didn't see when you made that video. So has your, like, kind of like with the crunch, how you've been able to chew on it a bit, has your thought process on unionization in the games industry changed? And then do you just have a reaction to what's going down, or to the people that are trying to unionize up at BioWare?
Yeah, I mean, I do have some thoughts. So I do think that to a large degree, big corporations are very slow to act. And they're very big and they're very powerful. And when it is up to a single individual to negotiate with a big corporation, that person is going to usually lose that fight. So what unions do is they just balance out the fight a little bit. Instead of it being one versus a company of 8,000 people, it's 80 people or 800 people against a company of $4 billion worth of revenue. So I do think it's helpful for that. I'm actually curious as to some of the details with the keywords one specifically, because back in 2020, when I was still at BioWare, where they're saying like they were forced into the office, I wonder if that was a BioWare. I don't believe that was actually a BioWare that was a BioWare contract, because at that time, early COVID days, I was trying to get into the office and it was like locked down. We couldn't even get into the office. I couldn't get into the office. I was the vice president. I couldn't get into the office. So I'm curious as to the details of that. They are a contractor, so it's possible that they were working on something else and they were being forced into an office. I don't know. It's possible that something was happening that I'm unaware of, but that specific thing that they were talking about it was just caught me by surprise, because I was trying to violate the rules and I couldn't even do it for myself. So, but I do believe that honestly, I think some of the changes that we want to see in the industry are going to require much stronger negotiating power from the side of the devs. Now, as I said in that video, I do think there may be unintended consequences, because if everyone is represented by a union, like one possible outcome of all of this might be something that looks very much like movie production. Paramount or Disney or whoever, they don't actually make movies. They start little companies, and those companies make movies that then it's weird, but it's this elaborate corporate bit of chicanery that allows them to control their costs and hide things and do all this stuff. I actually believe that the big video game publishers would love that. They love the idea of this little bit of shell games. I don't think that if that's where we ended up, that devs would be very happy with that, because one of the consequences of that is everyone in Hollywood's an independent contractor, but you're unionized. But you have a job when you're working on a movie, and then you don't, and then you do, and then you don't. So I think there one potential consequence of unions might be something similar to that. In the long run, that's still probably better off for the devs, because now it opens the door to conversations around revenue sharing and things like that, and probably salaries go up on average overall in order to cover for the fact that maybe you're only working 10 months out of 12. But it could be really bad in the middle. And the reality is some of these changes, some of these things that we want to see in the game industry would require strikes. And most of us have never been on a picket line.
Sure.
So like that's a hard thing. So you don't get what you want just because you're a union now. You get what you want because you're a union now, and you're willing to go on strike. You're willing to walk out. I do think that it may be what's required to move to cause the video game industry to mature and enter its next phase of maturity. But it's going to be bad in the middle. I also wonder if I understand why QA is leading the charge on this, because they're historically the worst treated of all the departments. But I actually wonder if it might not end up being used by the publishers who are more anti-union to, as almost like, hey, artists, you don't want to unionize like QA. Like it won't be used almost like a weapon to resist reunionization across the rest of it. And you might end up in a situation where QA is unionized and done by largely external companies and everyone else remains ununionized. I don't think that would be the end result that anyone would really want. It would help the QA situation, but I don't know. It's not. It's a middle ground, and I think in this case, the middle is not where you want to be. I think you want to be either we're all going to unionize, and we're going to either have a video game development union, or we're going to have craft unions, or something like that, or we stay in the situation that we're in now, where and we figure out how to fix some of these things without unionizing. I don't know that a world where only QA is unionized, which I think is at the moment maybe one of the possible futures, is actually that great. Okay,
so shifting away from all that stuff, I wanted to ask a few sort of higher level conceptual questions. There's a sentiment that we hear often, and specifically in the AAA space, that game development is like exponentially getting more and more expensive. But I've always wondered if, like, why specifically that is. Intuitively, I know a bigger game would cost more money, but I don't know necessarily why. So I guess my question is, are games really getting more expensive to make as, like, I think Sean Layden said something about this a few months ago.
Did, yes.
Are they exponentially getting more expensive to make as people say, and then why is that happening specifically?
So they are getting exponentially more expensive to make. Dragon Age Origins is a very expensive game. Some sort of just like boilerplate things. Partly inflation, partly stuff like, things will just get more expensive over time, even if everything stays constant. But if you look at a game like Dragon Age Origins, it's about 7,000 staff months to make. So it was a huge game at the time. Most of that was done before BioWare was owned by EA. Salaries went up dramatically, way higher than inflation after BioWare was acquired by EA. So that made a big difference. But Dragon Age Inquisition was more staff months than Dragon Age Origins by a fair amount. And so couple of things. The entire code base for Dragon Age Origins, I think about 2 million lines of code. Frostbite is like 20 million lines of code. So there's development costs of just holding that together, but things are just more complicated. So as games get bigger, they get expensive. But that's actually kind of linear. Not quite, because there's some n squared issues but if you would just imagine that I have a linear game that's 3 hours long, and I make the same linear game and I make it 6 hours long, really my cost should only go up by double. Like I haven't added any complexity, I've just added more. So games have gotten bigger, and I think we've crossed a point where probably too much bigger, that we're probably going to see a retreat from the size of some of these games to something that's a little bit more sustainable. But the real thing that pushes it is the complexity of things. If you look at Baldur's Gate 1, the walk animation is literally it's a flip grid, and it's like got 16 frames. If you look at a walk animation in a game today, well, first of all, it's not 3D animation, got to look good from every single direction. Also, you've got to have secondary animations of the guy's breathing, and then maybe you throw in like this thing that he does every once in a while where he like, you know, pulls out a stick and flips it around just to add a little bit of extra character. And he's got cloth animating on him, and he's got to be able to put on different hats and be different races. I guess that was true of Baldur's Gate as well. And he's so it's really that, because it's really fidelity and complexity. If you look back at games from a long time ago, they take a lot of shortcuts that aren't necessarily obvious, and they do so in order to save time, or honestly, in a lot of cases, because you couldn't do these things. These days, where you have so much more memory, so much more processing power, it's possible to do so much more. So often they do. But I think that's why the Soulsborne games have been such a breath of fresh air for the industry, because when you look at those games, especially the earlier ones, they're games built with the sentiment of the early 2000s, but they're built on modern hardware. So they don't have amazing animations. They have adequate animations. They don't have amazing graphical fidelity. They have adequate graphical fidelity. What they have is amazing combat mechanics and balance and things like that. So they were able to, and the budgets on like Dark Souls and Demon Souls that are like tiny compared to their contemporaries, because they lopped off a lot of the complexity. And so right now, I think we're in a world where things we're still reinventing the camera for every film we make in video game industry. We're still throwing out so much from game to game to game. But as we get into photogrammetry from a 3D assets perspective, as motion capture and performance capture becomes more accepted as part of the industry, I think what you're going to start to see is games that get made almost a la carte. They go into these repositories of data. They buy a bunch of animations. They buy a bunch of 3D models that are of excellent photo quality, photographic quality, and maybe we start to remove some complexity by being willing to reuse things more in interesting ways. But right now, it's like every single game is a concept car, and it's an increasingly more complex concept car.
So what is driving that? Is it and I know that it's probably not one single thing, but is the philosophy that gigantic, Aloy having little tiny facial hairs on her face, stuff like that somehow drives sales and it's good for marketing? Is that what's driving, or is it just sort of a natural progression of technology? What's the source behind the exponential growth in budget?
I think it's natural for a team to want to push their what they have to the edge. But definitely it is seen as being a marketing thing. Let's show Aloy and how pretty she looks, or let's get NVIDIA to give us $2 million to market this game because we can show off their latest video card really well. Honestly, I think one of the things that it might be is that as an industry, I don't think we actually have a really great handle on what results in a good review score and what results in a game going viral and taking off. So if you don't know, then the perception is everything has to be perfect, because anything could be the thing that makes the internet say your game is crap. I mean, you see think pieces showing the same combat animation being used in 2 different Pokemon games. That is stupid. But you get that, and people complaining about that happening. So with that sort of flowing around in the subconscious of the devs, they're like, well, I better put little hairs on her arm, because otherwise maybe there's going to be an article in Kotaku about how her skin's as smooth as the dolphins, and I don't want that. But they don't know, and probably there wouldn't be, but they don't know. So I don't know if it's fear. I think some of it's fear. I think some of it is, there's a lot of last game-itis in the industry. So what ends up happening a lot is you play a game, you play Horizon, and you look at Aloy's skin, and you go, wow, we need to do that. And then you play something else, and it has amazing cloth physics. And you go, well, now we got to have that too. And then you play the latest surfing game, and you say, and also the water technology, and also this and Arborist Simulator 2022 has the best trees in the industry. We better have amazing trees as well. But the reality is you didn't need all 4 of those features.
Sure.
Each of those features, like, I think you need to go in and say, like, if we're Arborist Simulator, we better have A+ trees. But it doesn't really matter how good our skin is. We can be a B or even a C. Who cares? It's just we're Arborist Simulator. But if you're not willing to go in and do that, everything is treated as if it's got to be an A+. And then what you do is you just kind of set that trap for the people that come after you. When KOTOR put in voice acting for all of the conversations, not the player, but everyone else, that changed the industry. Basically, at that moment, it no longer became acceptable to not have voiced conversations in AAA games. And this happens once in a while, where it just becomes a need. And sometimes they come into being and fall away. So Inquisition has a horse, because at the time it was seen that you had to have a horse in a fantasy RPG. I don't think that's true anymore. If you made a fantasy RPG today, you get away without not having a horse. But at the time, it was seen that you had to have a horse, so it has a horse. Does it have the best horse? No. But there's a complexity in that game added because of what was seen as the external pressures. So it's a bit of everything. Teams are always going to push, but I honestly think it's a lack of knowledge of what really matters and when you're developing. All
right, so okay, that's a great. Let's bring up Elden Ring. I saw you tweeted that you said you may have. Or have you started playing Elden Ring?
I have not started playing it yet. No. Instead, I fell into Unreal. But yes,
okay.
I'm going to have the path handed my badge if I don't play it pretty soon.
All right, cool. So something I've thought about. I've thought about this. I've thought about if the desire to make things shinier and bigger is overestimated, I guess, because when you look at Elden Ring, I don't think is the best looking game, but like that doesn't decrease my experience of it, and it doesn't seem like there are people everywhere complaining about that. What's the queen? There's a character in the game. She gets a close up, and her skin sort of looks like a porcelain, you know.
Yeah.
But that didn't really bother me, and so I think. But this is outside looking in because I'm not a game developer. Is it overestimated? And do games like Elden Ring, could they be evidence of that? Because
yes.
they're not as shiny?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's hard because, some games get the benefit of the doubt from reviewers and some games don't. But I do think Elden Ring is evidence of a lot of things that I think that the industry has made mistakes about. Because I think what Elden Ring is basically is, what if you spent 4 times as much money on a Soulsborne?
Yeah.
Not what if you spent $250 million on a Soulsborne? What if you just spent a lot more than what you spent before, but you kind of had the same philosophy towards the way that you did things, that you did things to a good quality, but you didn't stress so much about it being the best quality. I do, and again, and Elden Ring is big, but it's not the biggest. I talked about this, I think. I'm just going to check. I think the video came out about the press loves asking questions that I think are actually really harmful to game development as a whole, which is how long is your game?
Yeah.
How big is your game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think those questions are terrible questions that no one should ask ever again. Because I think they cause developers to lie, but also they cause developers to add padding, and try to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And I do think that when you look at Elden Ring changes the conversation in a couple of really great ways. It's big, but it's not huge. No. It's got good fidelity, but it doesn't have amazing, perfect fidelity. It also, and the other thing that I think will change the conversation, I hope in a lot of ways, is it respects the intelligence of its player in a way that I feel that, and I think I've been guilty of this as well, but I feel that the industry in aggregate, on average, has stopped doing to a large degree in an effort to make our games as accessible and playable as possible. We've actually kind of removed, we've UIified our games to a point where they've maybe they've lost some of their impact. I mean, you saw some of these think pieces of, look at this screenshot from Assassin's Creed versus this screenshot from Elden Ring. And I mean, there's a bit of a false narrative there, but it's not completely false.
Sure.
I think Elden Ring is to a large degree saying, figure it out. And I do believe you should make your games accessible. I think we've maybe learned the wrong lesson from that statement as an industry as a whole.
Okay. So it's funny that we were talking about Forbidden West, because one of the critiques and one of the complaints about Forbidden West is how often Aloy narrates the solution to a puzzle or something like that. And it's interesting when you play, because they came out right around the same time, and so when you play them back to back, it's like one game just tosses you into a dungeon and just go that way and have fun. And then in Forbidden West, it's very it does sort of try and help you see things, but it gets to a point where it's sort of telling you things. You brought up accessibility. This is a question that I'm not a developer, but I struggle with as a fan of games, because I understand that I want games to be played by anybody, no matter what, as much as possible. But at the same time, I know there are games where I just don't know if that is possible, because of the certain types of VR games. If you're making a VR game that's a military simulator, you can't have teleportation in it, because then it's not going to be a simulation, and that may reduce the number of people that can play it. So when you're making a game, how do you go about balancing your creative vision and what you want to make with the accessibility? What goes on there?
I think it's something that you need to keep in mind. But when you look at Forbidden West is a great example of this. Was obviously in testing, people were getting stuck on things, and this was a solution they figured out to keep people moving. I don't think it's actually a bad solution. It's just that in contrast with Elden Ring, I feel sorry for the Horizon developers, because they seem to be consistently coming out against genre-defining games, because Zero Dawn came out against
Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
So it was I feel sorry for them. I don't think it's a bad solution. I think it's a good solution. but I do think you need to know what, if I'm going to make a game that's all about it being super dark and having to use audio cues to find my way around the environment. So if I'm making a normal 3D third-person exploration game, I might want to put audio cues. I might want to provide a UI helper to audio cues. Like there's a rustle over there. Maybe I put a little red thing and saying there was a rustle over here. Because then people who have difficulty localizing audio or people who are hard of hearing would be able to go, oh, something came from over there. But if I'm making a game about listening to things in the environment, that's probably not something I want to do, because that's the game I'm making is about this this audio thing. So inherently, by the very fundamental genetic design of the game, it's inaccessible to people that have hearing problems. And I don't think I should cross that line in that particular case, because I think it would probably destroy the integrity of the gameplay and the process. But I don't know where, as soon as you introduce the concept of some sort of exception, I don't know where the end of that is. Mm-hmm. Elden Ring doesn't should our games about difficult combat? Should we not have difficulty modes? Because that's going to destroy the integrity of the game. I'm not really on board with that one, but that's a decision that's been made as well. So I think you need to sort of know where your lines are, or they're kind of going to be there anyway. If you play Skyrim, so you go through one of the most boring beginnings of any game ever. Where you ride
breaking news! BioWare throwing shade. No, I'm kidding.
And then you do like a really great. So you have the wagon bit. And then you have the actually really great tutorial bit with the dragon attacking. Right. And then right after that, you escape with that guy, and the guy looks you in the eye and says something to the effect of choose between the two different factions. Right, really early. That decision doesn't matter at all, really. But you don't know. And there are people that's the last experience they have with Skyrim, because they hit that point. And the decision paralysis from that point, they nope out of the game right there, right after the tutorial, because they don't know what to do. And so that's an accessibility problem. People who have difficulty making decisions get stuck by a decision of little consequence. So should you address that accessibility issue? Should you provide them more information so that they can make a better decision? That's what Inquisition tries to do with important decisions, where it tries to tell you the consequence of your decision for decisions, like for impactful decisions. So the truth is games are made of 10,000 decisions. Accessibility probably make up a good 1,000 of those tens of thousands of decisions. You can't. I don't know that there's a generalized philosophy. I think you need to consider each instance and think about what you're doing in that instance. I think you can actually make a game inaccessible by worrying about accessibility too much. And I would argue that that's a consistent problem of a lot of BioWare games, is we try so hard to explain to you in the first 3 hours what's going on, how everything works, all the mechanics, everything. We're just dumping so much on the player that they're overwhelmed and bored, probably bored, but I mean also overwhelmed. If you throw too much at me, you've actually reduced my ability to learn it. So you've actually made the game, in your effort to make me understand, you've actually made me understand less potentially.
Okay, that's a fact. Do you remember? Well, do you remember like a specific instance when you were working on a game and you had to make a decision on a specific feature, whether it was going to be more accessible or less accessible? Do you have like a specific memory of making a decision like that?
I know that we chose, so I actually think we made the wrong decision on Inquisition, but I think the crafting system in Inquisition is inaccessible. It's a very complicated system. There are no recipes. It's all based on like combinations of different things giving you different materials. And then there's an appearance system layered on top of that, which adds an additional layer of complexity. I think as a result, we have a system that is basically not engaged with by most players. By the vast majority of players do not engage in crafting because it is inaccessible. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not sure that it hurts the game that much because it's not critical to you playing that game. I think that the one that I'm something that's come up a couple of times in BioWare's history is the idea of a story mode difficulty. So the ability to play through the game on essentially you can't lose combat. Mass Effect 3, I want to say, has such a difficulty. But we didn't do that in Inquisition. And the reason is not because I don't think, given what BioWare games are, which is a lot about the interaction of different characters and engaging in the story and that, I don't think that a story mode difficulty is inappropriate for a BioWare game. But the problem is, if you play Mass 3, I think it's Mass 3, on that difficulty, combat's kind of awful. Like, it actually kind of makes the game, it damages the game in the process, because the combat is easy but fast, so it's kind of just this weird morass you have to dig through. So I think when you're thinking about accessibility, something like that, you have to think about how does the more accessible version still allow the game to be good. So for me, a story mode, the ideal for me in a story mode difficulty would be you would enter into combat, a really awesome cutscene would play of you being awesome in combat, and then you would keep going. Obviously, I mean, that's really expensive. You're probably not going to see that.
Sure.
But so when you're thinking about things like that, I think you need to think about, does turning this accessibility feature on damage the game to such a degree that the game isn't actually anymore? So because you always have the option of having some of these features. So in some cases, the choice between the accessible and inaccessible or less accessible option is an option. You can have HUD elements turned off and let the player turn them on. But if turning them on makes the game bad in some way, I think that's the line you have to be really careful about crossing. I think the problem with accessibility right now is that the question you asked, which was, have we ever done that? And I think there are a couple of cases when we have, but I think the reality is that actually very rarely are you actually thinking that way. You've come up with a feature, you've put it in, you're really far through the development pipeline. Then you get the feedback back saying, people can't understand this. They can't figure this out. Or people with red-green color blindness are not going to be able to play this. And then you go, oh no! And a common example, actually, in a lot of BioWare games is puzzles. So you put a puzzle in, and then the game is broken, and you're going along, and then the level comes together, and it's weeks or months later, and then QA starts playing, and they're saying, I can't figure this puzzle out. And you're like, but it's obvious in my head, says the puzzle designer. And then you have to decide what you're going to do. You can pull the puzzle out completely, which has happened a lot in BioWare games. You just end up pulling it out.
Sure.
Or you put the answer on the wall, which you can see in tons of BioWare games, where it's like, figure out this puzzle. Oh, really? Because the answer is literally written on a giant poster right beside the puzzle, which I think just undermines the whole puzzle. What's the point? Mm-hmm. Or you just say, forget it, we're just going to leave it. And the way that we've typically made the decision at BioWare for things like that is, if it's on the critical path, the expectation is it should be accessible to any player. So you should be able to get through the main line of the story, even if you can't figure out any of the puzzles. So we might put a puzzle on the critical path to introduce the concept of puzzles to you, but the answer is on a poster board right beside it. If you're off the critical path, if you're on the optional content, then all bets are off. If you can't figure it out, then you can't figure it out. But that comes from a belief that we want most people to finish the story, which I think might actually be a misplaced belief.
Really?
Most people don't. Well, so I don't know, maybe 2008, 2009, I had this feeling that, Bethesda's got a big problem. People don't finish their games. You play their game, and your last experience of a Bethesda game is always, I guess I'm done. But what I realized more recently is actually, in a lot of ways, that's maybe the best experience you can get from a player. Because if you think about how you experience a Mass Effect or a Dragon Age, your last experience of a Mass Effect of Dragon Age is one of two things. Either it's, what the fuck was that? I hate that ending. I am angry. Or it was, that was the greatest ending I ever experienced. Now I'm disappointed that it's over. And in both cases, the actual last emotion is actually negative. It's either a positive followed by disappointment, or it's a negative right off the bat. Mm-hmm. Whereas with the Bethesda game, with the open world games that you kind of just peer out on, is your last experience was just this kind of like mildly negative boredom. But then they don't have another game for a long time. So then when you're thinking about whether or not you should buy the next Elder Scrolls, you're not remembering, I never finished Elder Scrolls, or I never finished Skyrim.
Yeah.
What you're remembering is all the cool things you did in the middle of the game. So I think there's an obsession that I've had. I'm guilty of this, of we want people to finish our games, but actually maybe we don't. Maybe we don't want people to finish our games. Maybe we just want people to have their last experience not be negative, and lots of positive experiences in the middle. I don't know. This is pretty half-baked, but
no, that's really interesting. That's fascinating.
I do think that's something that I feel gamers and maybe developers want to have from their experiences that they've gotten or given, is that I'm done mentality, but not in the negative way. I've played plenty of games before that I've absolutely loved, but I've gotten to that proverbial wall where I'm just like, I've had my fill. That was great. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Let me go do something else now. And I think that's a mentality that people don't think about or have in their head, that it is okay to have in this gaming industry.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's exactly right. I think that's what we want, is we want people to have a great experience and leave remembering that great experience, not leave feeling like they wish there was more, or leave feeling like everything was ruined by the last 5 minutes of the game.
Well, I'll say this. I've only played through Dragon Age Inquisition one time, and it's a good thing, because after I finished it, I was so fulfilled, I could not go back and reimagine another character. Like, I wanted that character in that story that I told in the end, when all the people were at the wall and they all walked away one at a time, and then you were left with your romance option. I thought it was a brilliant ending. And I could never go back to Inquisition because, like, in my mind, it was perfectly set. So I was like, I don't know if I can make another character and do this again. That was great. So yeah, I disagree. I think Inquisition's ending was great.
It's interesting, though, because something that Ray Musica was always certain was one of BioWare's great competitive advantage was replayability. But I actually don't. I would argue that actually there are people that have played Dragon Age Inquisition 30 times, but most people that they don't do that. I think most people are more likely to have the experience that you had, which is you go through and you experience the story through a particular viewpoint, and then that's the viewpoint. You might go and make a Canary just to see what it's like, but what you see in the data is if a person finishes the game, usually they finish the game once, and then maybe they might have a few like little I played for 45 minutes or an hour just to goof around.
Right.
But very rarely do you get people that are I played through the entire game 10 times. It happens, but it's not a common playthrough. I think replayability in these story-driven games is actually kind of an illusion.
Okay. All right. So one more gigantic topic. We're at an hour 10 minutes here, so I have a few other questions, and we'll try not to keep you for too much longer. You've in a few of your videos you've mentioned the relationship between sort of the business side and the creative side of game development, and this is something that, especially for people like us on the outside, we have a hard time understanding because we don't know exactly how it's done. Like, we know that, like, for example, you said how EA's corporate culture sort of seeps down, and it's not like, Andrew Wilson doesn't kick open the door and like walk up to a developer and say, here's how you're doing this. So can you give us a better understanding of how a publisher like or really any publisher can sort of give a direction on how they want a game to be, even if it's not like a direct order,
Well,
straight.
there actually, it does happen. There are,
okay.
There are directive things. Joplin, the thing that was Dragon Age 4, was canceled because it was perceived that the next Dragon Age needed to have an online component. It needed to have a live service. It needed to have an online component. It needed to be live service. That was, so it was like there was essentially a decision made at a corporate level about what the game needed to be. And whether that was real or not, I don't know, but I have my own thoughts on that front, but that's what was said. But sometimes it's even stupider stuff. Like, there were people that were like, in Dragon Age Inquisition, you need to be able to fly a dragon. And it was like, this is a dictate. And I, judoed that out of into us not actually doing it, but that was a dictate that came down.
Really?
So there are reviews. So with EA, there are gates. So you have like numbered gates up to, actually I think there are more gates now, but basically you have a vision gate, or a concept gate, a vision gate, a pre-production gate, a production gate, a post-production gate, and like alpha and things like that. Some of those gates are formal gates. You have executives gather in a room and a presentation is made to them, and then they say, I don't like that. Do something different. And that could be anything from, I don't like that your character has a frog for a head, to this entire, especially in the early days, this entire concept is flawed. We shouldn't make this game at all. At EA, once things cross a certain threshold, they tend to continue. But in the early days, games do get canceled because they don't get through those gates. So they do have influence because they are seeing the game during development, and they are very important people who are expressing their opinions, and it's not entirely clear. I report to someone who reports to the person who is providing this feedback, so the presumption is they get to say what goes. I guess they probably do. It's not actually clear that they do, but the presumption is the reporting line is literally person reports to this person who is saying this thing. I suspect they probably get to decide if they say this needs to be a certain way, it's going to be a certain way. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's certainly what seems to be the case.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag. So sometimes it can literally be you get a directive from some corporate executive who says we want you to do this, and then other times it's less blunt. It's a little more nebulous, I guess, right? Like, because it's sort of implied or I don't know. I remember with Anthem, and I don't remember everything that was reported and stuff like that, so correct me if I say anything that's wrong. But Anthem, I don't ever remember reading the idea for a live service game from BioWare. I don't ever remember reading that it was something EA said, like, directed. But at the same time, it was sort of something like, this would be a good idea considering what EA wants.
So that's pretty close, I think. I wasn't on Anthem in the early days of it, but there was a with some of the executive, EA's never really understood what the heck BioWare is, but in the early days of Anthem, or let's say the days after Mass 3, there was a sentiment with some of the executives at EA that storytelling games were over. They were done. That we needed something different. So there was a lot of language that was being pushed at Casey and at Aaron that was essentially to that effect of, don't you think that the days of storytelling games are over? Maybe it's time to do something different. And I don't know, because I wasn't in the room, I don't know if that just fed into exactly the kind of game that Casey wanted to make anyway, or if they just sort of lined up. But so yeah, I think what you're saying is exactly right, which is no one at EA was saying make Anthem or make Dylan, which is what it was at the time. But there was pressure around, like, probably if you're making another thing and it's not another Mass Effect, you shouldn't just make another story-driven RPG. We don't want another one of those, we don't think. So there was a push towards something different. Some of the early things that Casey was pitching were still, they were multiplayer story-driven things, or they were different, but yeah, there was definitely a push from corporate to do something that wasn't Mass Effect, that wasn't Dragon Age, that was something else.
And how does that feel? Is that frustrating? Is that something you dread? You walk into work and you've got an email from a corporate liaison and they say something like, we want you to be able to ride a dragon. Like, is that frustrating? Is it something that
it's definitely frustrating. It's definitely I did a video about dear executive, you're being managed.
Yeah.
Like that, basically. As an executive producer, a big part of your job is managing executives so they feel like you're listening to them, even when what they're saying is stupid. So it can be incredibly frustrating. I feel like BioWare's left a lot of money on the table because of the purse strings that are held at the corporate level. Like, I feel like porting Star Wars: The Old Republic to the consoles would make a ton of money for not very much investment, and it could have been done 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
Long time.
The remasters, it's a miracle that they ever got made for Mass Effect. The thing that most studios within EA seem to do is they seem to do one thing at a time. So DICE makes a Battlefield, then they fix the Battlefield, then they make a new Battlefield. That makes corporate's interaction with them, I think, a lot more clear. When Battlefield 4 comes out, and it doesn't do well, they are given not just the ability, they're given the mandate to fix it. BioWare's always had a lot more plate spinning.
Sure, yeah.
But I think the consequence of that is when something goes wrong, it means that there are a lot of potential plates that could be spinning. And it means when something goes wrong, it's less obvious what to do. When Mass Effect Andromeda launches and has problems, unlike with Battlefield 4, EA doesn't say, fix it, I don't care what you were going to be doing next, fix it. What instead happens is the resources get taken away and put onto other things. Anthem fought to have resources to fix itself, but ultimately was always fighting with Dragon Age, to be frank, for those resources, for some of them at least. So I mean, maybe that's just an indication that BioWare has stubbornly held on to a structure that is incompatible with EA's corporate culture. But I do think that having so many plate spinning means that BioWare is always short of resources. And I think that's given EA a lot more ability to influence what BioWare's doing at any moment. Because it's like, well, why don't you just put those people, we don't want to keep trying to fix Andromeda. Why don't you just put those people onto Dragon Age, or we'll take them away and put them into EA Montreal. Whereas if you're just one studio in Sweden, or your Sims 4, to same thing, is they got nothing else to do. Mm-hmm. So I mean, they absolutely have other things to do, but it's not obvious. There's not an equal priority. There's the next thing, which is of lower priority. Whereas at BioWare, there's always something else they could be doing. And I think it's allowed EA, I think, more control over what BioWare does, maybe, than they've had in other studios, possibly. I don't know. Probably someone from DICE is going to angrily tell me I'm an idiot in your comments now.
Okay, I've heard you say that I've watched a few other interviews, and I've watched probably 5 hours of videos of yours. And I think I've heard you say that sentence before, that Electronic Arts didn't understand or / doesn't understand what BioWare is / was. Can you give us a bigger definition? Like what about BioWare did / does Electronic Arts not understand?
So I think that there are, I think it's a lot of things, but I think fundamentally EA is a company that understands sports games.
Yes. They
understand how to make sports games, which come out every year at a very high quality, monetize and they understand, they know how to market those. They know what production for those looks like. They know how to, keep that team moving forward and improving their quality. And they know how to do lots of things there. They know how to put processes in place to make the risk go down. I think when you apply those processes to shooters, I think they actually work pretty well. So maybe they don't work anymore, but I think they did work pretty well. You can kind of market a shooter like a sports game, and it basically works. I think that one of the huge advantages that sports games have is you already know if you like soccer or not. So so now I'm selling you the product, not selling you the concept of the product. Shooters, you can kind of do the same thing. You kind of already know if you want a shooter or not. Now I'm selling you on this specific shooter, not the concept of shooters in general. RPGs aren't like that. Mm-hmm. You can't, because RPGs are so different from each other that you can't sell me on the concept. Like I don't know if I just like RPGs. I need more than that to know if I can make a decision, which makes marketing them different. Also, for a variety of reasons, RPGs are the most expensive genre you can make because they have, in theory, all the complexities of a shooter, plus you have to tell an engaging interactive story that branches on top of that. Plus you need progression systems that are more complicated than your shooter on top of that. And that all needs to work together into some sort of combinatorial mess, to be frank. So I think that what EA wants from all their studios is they want things that can sell 10 million copies or 20 million copies. I mean, that number changes. And the truth of the matter is that maybe is just never BioWare. I mean, I say that Inquisition sold more than 10 million copies, but I think that what you have with BioWare is you have the Oscar studio. Do the Oscar movies make $3 billion? No, but they win you the awards.
Sure.
Do you want that? Do you want the studio that wins you the awards, but maybe it makes money? I'm not saying that EA should just let BioWare be losing money. That's stupid. But do you want something that's less profitable but earns you acclaim? And if you do, then you need to measure it in a different way. Do you want something that can build new IP? BioWare can build new IPs, and then maybe you take those IPs and you do other things with them. Not that EA has done that, and maybe EA doesn't need to because they own like 40, 50 IPs they're currently not doing anything with. But I mean, that's like building an IP is incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
Incredibly difficult. Does EA want new IPs? Maybe, but I don't know that they. So what they have with BioWare is they have a company that can make the kinds of games that get into the conversation at award season, that can push culture, that can build new IPs, but be in the conversation at award season, push culture, and build new IPs. Are those characteristics that EA wants, or do they want can sell 25 million copies and make $1 billion? And probably you can't have those first three things and get that fourth thing. Mm-hmm. You can be profitable, but you're probably not selling 25 million copies and making $1 billion. I mean, Skyrim did, but that's. But I think honestly, Skyrim just proves how hard it is. The fact that it's the one in the RPG space that you talk about, and that's from 2011.
Yeah,
sort of like I think it kind of makes is the exception that proves the rule. Is like that's the RPG that was culturally relevant, that but also made a lot of that was relevant at award season, but also made a ton of money.
Okay, so Richard, you have a question you want to ask, and then I've got two more, and then we'll wrap this up.
Sure, yeah. This is regarding to your status as an independent developer nowadays. But of course, we have our jobs because we want to make money, but we enjoy doing what we do. But eventually, when you are an indie dev, you have the chance of having a hit or growing exponentially. You then get spotted by bigger publishers who may want to purchase you, and you may not want that. Like, how do you as a indie developer kind of shy away from wanting to be purchased from a developer, or is that something you just can't help?
I mean, I think that it's I'm not even sure which microphone I'm on anymore, but it's I think if you are trying to if you're trying to be on the journey, this is the journey I think a lot of indies want to be on, is they want to be like, I made a little game by myself, then me and a little team made a game, then we were III or AAA indie, then we were AA, then we were AAA. Like, they want to sort of follow that path. If you want to follow that path, somewhere along that way, you're going to have to be acquired. Well, maybe not acquired. You're going to have to work with a publisher pretty tightly, because at some point your budget is going to go from, it's going to cross a threshold you can no longer afford. So, you know, why can I not think of them? The Obsidian.
Yes,
Obsidian basically did that exact thing. There's like, we're going to be essentially a work for hire studio, and then we're going to do a little bit of stuff on our own. We're going to try to do something bigger, and then we are going to try to become AA, and in the process, we're going to get bought by Microsoft, and they're going to give us the money we need to finish our AA game. Sometimes the acquisition happens even earlier, when you're at the sort of III space, but you don't have to. You don't have to follow that path. You can be like, I'm going to make a little indie game on my own. Oh, it did okay. I made another indie game. It made enough money for me to hire a few people. Now we're 10 people, and we make games, and we're going to just be 10 people forever. We make games to make enough money to pay our salaries, and that's just what it's going to be. And there are companies that do that. The reality is you probably haven't heard of most of those companies because they basically make enough money to pay the salary of 10 people. So, you know, if they make a game a year and that game sells 300,000 copies, they're laughing. So you've probably never even heard of them. So you don't have to sell. I do think that you can get yourself in over your ski. You can get yourself out over your skis. You can you know, borrow money to try to make something bigger, and now you have no money and you don't have enough money to finish your game. That's, I think, what happens a lot. It's hard to finish a game, and so you can get pretty far along, pretty deep in that hole, and then run out of money. And then when the publisher comes knocking and says, "We'd love to help you out, just sign this thing," then you might have no choice, because otherwise it's not about choosing not to sell. It's about choosing between existing and not existing. Right. I think a lot of times that's when that sale occurs. I mean, I think BioWare was close to being out of money when it sold the first time. DICE, I think, sold under similar circumstances when it was basically close out of money. I think that's often the reason the sale happens. I don't think it's because, you know, our industry is different. It's not like we're manufacturing where it's like, unless you get $40 million to build a factory, you can't make anything. You can make something with no money. And so you can just choose not to cross into the more expensive territory. But you almost have to choose not to, because if you don't make that choice, you're probably going to cross that line by accident, and then be stuck with 60% of the game that's going to cost $20 million, and you don't have $20 million.
Right.
Hey everybody, Tyler here. If you didn't see in the description, we had some technical difficulties. The mics went bad, Skype wasn't working right. It'll probably be the last time we use Skype. Some of the questions we asked at the end had some really great answers, but there was static over them, so I went ahead and transcribed them. And if you go to the description or a top comment on YouTube, you can read the transcriptions of the questions we asked at the end. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Darrah. Old Game Dev Advice, his YouTube channel is great. I would recommend checking it out. You can support us, patreon.com/thegamingdiscourse. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.